I spent 7 years hiding from my father's fortune. I changed my name, I built a simple life, and I married the love of my life without ever telling him the truth. He thought he knew me. He thought we were just two ordinary people building an ordinary future. Then one day, he came home with news that made my blood run cold. He told me a billionaire wanted to invest in his small firm. He told me the man's name. And in that moment, I realized my husband was about to meet my father for the very first time, and I hadn't told either of them about each other. What happened next destroyed everything I had built and revealed a secret I never saw coming. This is my story. My name is Evelyn, and for the first 25 years of my life, I was a ghost. Not a sad, tragic ghost, but a carefully constructed one. To the world, I was Evie, a girl who worked at a small, dusty bookstore in a quiet corner of Ohio. I drove a beat-up Honda Civic that had a mysterious rattle and a heater that only worked in the summer. I wore second-hand sweaters, and my biggest financial worry was whether I could afford a new pair of boots before the snow came. That was the life I chose. Or rather, the life I ran to. You see, my father is Richard Sterling. Maybe you've heard of him. He's the founder of Sterling Industries, a conglomerate so massive it touches everything from the microchips in your phone to the shipping containers that carry them across the ocean. Forbes has called him a titan of industry. Time magazine has put him on its cover more times than I can count. The Sterling name is synonymous with power, with money, with a kind of cold, unfeeling ambition. And I wanted nothing to do with any of it. My childhood was a gilded cage. I grew up in a house so big I could get lost in it for hours. I had everything a little girl could possibly want, except for the one thing I needed most. My parents, they were always at galas, at board meetings, on private jets to somewhere more important than home. I was raised by a series of nannies, each one kind but ultimately temporary. They were hired help, and they knew it. They were paid to care for me, but they weren't paid to love me, and that was a distinction I learned to understand all too well. My father, especially, was a distant figure. He was a man of sharp suits and sharper words. Our conversations were brief, transactional. He'd ask about my grades, and I'd give him a number. He'd tell me to be a credit to the family name, and I'd nod. He never asked what I was reading, or who my friends were, or if I was happy. I don't think it ever occurred to him to ask. Happiness was an abstract concept, like poetry or art. It didn't have a place in the ledgers of his life. My mother was different, or at least she tried to be. Amelia was a soft woman in a hard world. She loved music and painting, things my father considered frivolous. I remember her sneaking into my room at night to read me stories, her voice a whispered melody against the silence of that enormous house. She would hold me and tell me that I was special, that I was more than just a Sterling. She was my refuge, my proof that warmth existed in that cold marble world. But when I was 16, she got sick. It was fast and brutal, and within 6 months she was gone. After she passed, the house became even colder. My father retreated further into his work, and I was left alone with my grief and a nanny who didn't know how to comfort me. Her death was the final crack in whatever bond I had left with my father. He didn't know how to grieve, and I didn't know how to reach him. We became two strangers living under the same roof, united only by loss and an inability to share it. When I turned 18, I made a decision that would define the next 7 years of my life. I refused to go to the Ivy League school he had chosen for me. I refused the trust fund, the car, the apartment. I refused it all. I told him I didn't want his money. I told him I wanted to make my own way, to live a real life, not the curated, polished, empty existence he had planned for me. The argument that followed was the loudest we'd ever had. He called me naive, ungrateful, a fool. He said I had no idea what the real world was like, that I would fail and come crawling back. I told him he didn't know me at all, and that I would rather fail on my own terms than succeed on his. I brought up my mother, told him she would have understood, and the look on his face was one of such raw pain that I almost took it back. But I didn't. I was young and angry and hurting, and I needed someone to blame. I walked out of that marble mausoleum with 2 suitcases, a few $1,000s I'd saved from summer jobs, and a burning fire in my heart. I legally changed my last name to my mother's maiden name, Campbell. It was a small act of rebellion, a way to sever the final tie. Evelyn Sterling was gone, I was just Evie Campbell. The first year was hard, harder than I ever imagined. I moved to a small town in Ohio because the rent was cheap, and it was as far from Connecticut as I could get without leaving the country. I worked as a barista at a coffee shop called Grounds for Discussion, where I learned that people could be genuinely kind without wanting something in return. I waited tables at a diner called Mel's, where the regulars knew my name and asked about my day. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with a window unit air conditioner that barely worked and a neighbor who played the trumpet badly at all hours of the night. But it was mine. Every penny I earned was mine. Every meal I cooked was mine. Every friend I made was mine. After 2 years, I saved enough to stop waiting tables and focus on the job I really wanted. I found the Gilded Page, a wonderful, dusty old bookstore owned by an elderly woman named Margaret. She was 73, with silver hair pinned up in a bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She hired me on the spot when I correctly identified the first edition of Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises sitting on her shelf. She said anyone who knew their books was family. Margaret became like the grandmother I never had. She taught me how to repair old bindings, how to spot a forgery, how to recommend the perfect book to a hesitant reader. She trusted me with the keys to the store, with her customers, with her heart. When she got sick 2 years into my employment, I was the one who took her to her doctor's appointments. When she passed away a year later, she left the bookstore to me in her will. It was the first time anyone had ever left me anything out of love, not obligation. I cried for a week, but I also kept the store open, honoring her memory every single day. That's where I met Mark. He walked into the Gilded Page one rainy Tuesday afternoon, shaking water from his hair like a dog. He was looking for a first edition of a Jack London novel, a gift for his father. He was charming in an unpolished, genuine way. He had kind eyes and an easy laugh, and he didn't try to impress me with fancy talk or expensive clothes. He was an architect, he told me, with a small but growing firm. He was passionate about his work, talking about lines and light and the soul of a building in a way that made my own heart flutter. I found the book for him, a 1903 edition of The Call of the Wild in surprisingly good condition. His face lit up when he saw it, and I knew in that moment that this was a man who understood value beyond price tags. He asked if he could take me to coffee to thank me. I said yes before I could stop myself. Our first date was at a tiny diner on the edge of town. He ordered a burger and fries, and I did the same. We talked for 4 hours. He told me about his parents, his father a retired carpenter, his mother a school teacher. He told me about his dream to design affordable, beautiful housing for families who couldn't afford architects. He told me about his fear that he wasn't good enough, that his small firm would never make it. I saw myself in him, the same hunger for something real, the same fear of failure. When he walked me to my door, he kissed me softly and said he wanted to see me again. For the first time in years, I felt something I had forgotten was possible. Hope. We started dating seriously. He took me to hole-in-the-wall diners, not Michelin-starred restaurants. He brought me flowers from the farmer's market, not from a high-end florist. He held my hand and told me I was beautiful, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. He didn't know about my father. He didn't know about the money. He just knew Evie, the girl who loved old books and made a mean cup of coffee on the store's hot plate. I was terrified to tell him the truth. At first, it was a fun secret, a quirky detail of my past. But as we got more serious, the secret became a wall. I was scared he would look at me differently. I was scared he would see the dollar signs instead of me, that he would become like all the other people in my old life who only saw my father's name. I convinced myself that my past didn't matter. Evie Campbell was who I was now. Evelyn Sterling was a ghost. I also worried about his family. They were so warm, so genuine. His mother, Donna, called me sweetheart from the first time we met. His father, Bill, taught me how to fish at the lake behind their house. They invited me to every family gathering, treated me like a daughter. What would they think if they knew I had been lying to their son? What would they think of a girl who ran away from a billionaire father? Would they think I was spoiled, ungrateful, damaged? I couldn't bear the thought of losing them too. After a year, Mark proposed. He got down on one knee in the bookstore, surrounded by the smell of old paper and dust. He didn't have a fancy ring, just a simple silver band with a tiny diamond. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I said yes, tears streaming down my face, a tiny knot of fear tightening in my stomach. The knot grew larger as the wedding approached. I still hadn't told him. My mother had passed away when I was a teenager, a fact that was true, and I used it to explain my lack of family at the wedding. I told him my father and I were estranged. That part, at least, was honest. He was compassionate and understanding, telling me that we could build our own family, our own future. He never pushed for details. The day of our wedding was perfect. It was a small ceremony in a friend's backyard, with wildflowers and fairy lights. Mark's family was there, warm and welcoming. His mother cried. His father shook Mark's hand and told him he was a lucky man. My heart ached with the absence of my own mother, but I pushed it down. I stood at the makeshift altar, looking into his eyes, and felt a love so pure and deep it terrified me. I was marrying a man who loved the real me, the me I had created. But a part of me, the part that was still Evelyn, knew I was building our life on a foundation of sand. We moved into a small apartment together. A 2-bedroom place with a kitchen that actually had counter space, and a bedroom window that faced east so the sun woke us gently. We painted the living room a soft blue, his favorite color. I hung pictures of us on the walls, our wedding, our first vacation to a lake, his family at Christmas. It was a home, my first real home since my mother died. And every night, I lay next to him and promised myself I would tell him tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. The trouble started subtly, like a crack in a dam. Mark's architectural firm was struggling. A big project they were counting on fell through, leaving them in a precarious financial position. He started working longer hours, the worry lines on his face deepening. He tried to hide it, but I could see the toll it was taking. He would stare at our bills with a haunted look, his shoulders slumped. He stopped sleeping through the night, getting up at 3 in the morning to sketch designs, hoping inspiration would strike and save them. I wanted to help, desperately. I had access to a world of money that could solve all our problems in an instant. A single phone call, and our debts would vanish. A single check, and his firm would be solvent. But I couldn't. Helping him would mean revealing my secret. It would mean admitting I had lied to him every single day since we met. It would mean bringing the ghost of Evelyn Sterling into our fragile, beautiful life. So I stayed silent. I held him when he was stressed. I made him cheap, comforting meals. I told him everything would be okay, but inside I was crumbling. The guilt was a physical weight on my chest. I started having nightmares, dreams where Mark found out and looked at me with eyes full of disgust. I would wake up gasping, and he would pull me close, never knowing he was comforting me over the lie I was telling him. I also started following my father's news again, something I hadn't done in years. I would stay up late, reading articles about Sterling Industries, looking at pictures of my father at galas and press conferences. He looked older, more tired. There were rumors of health problems, of him stepping back from the company. A part of me, the part I tried to ignore, worried about him. Another part, the darker part, wondered if this was my punishment for leaving. If he got sick and I never made peace with him, could I live with myself? I pushed the thought away. I had my own life now. I had Mark. Then Mark came home one evening with a strange look on his face. It was a mix of excitement and something else, something I couldn't quite place. He sat me down at our small kitchen table. "Evie," he began, his voice hesitant. Something has happened." My heart stopped. He knows, he's found out. "What is it?" I whispered. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit. "You know the Miles Corporation project, the one that fell through?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "Well," he continued, "they called today. They're reconsidering. They want to meet with us again. But it's not just them. They're acting as a proxy for a larger investor. A private investor who is very interested in our work. They want to meet with me tomorrow." Relief washed over me so powerfully I felt dizzy. It wasn't about me, it was work. "Mark, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, grabbing his hands. "This could be the big break you've been waiting for." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah," he said slowly. "It is. It's just the investor. They're based in New York, and their name, it's a big name, Evie. A huge name." A cold dread began to creep up my spine, replacing the relief. "What name?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could feel it in my bones. He looked at me, his brown eyes filled with a nervous awe. "Sterling. Richard Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Industries." The world tilted. The kitchen, the table, Mark's worried face, it all seemed to spin. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. My father. My father was about to walk into my life. Mark mistook my shock for starstruck awe. "I know, right?" he said, misreading me completely. "It's crazy. A man like that, interested in a small firm like ours, I can't even believe it. My partner, David, he nearly fell out of his chair when we got the call. This could put us on the map, Evie. This could be everything." I tried to speak, to form the words that would shatter our world, but nothing came out. My throat was closed, my voice trapped. I thought of my father's cold, analytical eyes. I thought of his words, "You'll come crawling back." Was this his doing? Had he found me? Was this his idea of a joke, a test, a punishment? "Evie, you've gone pale. Are you okay?" Mark's voice was laced with concern. He reached across the table and touched my hand. I flinched, then tried to cover it with a cough. "I'm fine," I lied, the words scraping against my dry throat. "It's just a shock. That's all, Richard Sterling. It's a lot to take in." He kissed my forehead. "It's a shock to me too, but it's a good shock. This could change everything for us, for our future, for our family." Our future. The future I had built on a lie. The future that was now standing on the precipice of being torn apart by the very man I had run away from. I thought about the children we had talked about having, the house with the garden, the dog we would get. All of it hinged on this moment, on a secret I had kept for too long. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had two choices. I could tell Mark everything, right now, before the meeting. I could confess my lie, beg for his forgiveness, and hope that our love was strong enough to survive the revelation. I could show him pictures of my childhood, explain about my mother, make him understand why I ran. Or I could say nothing, let the meeting happen, and pray that my father wouldn't recognize me. I weighed the options 1,000 times. If I told him now, at least it would be on my terms. I could control the narrative, explain my fears, my reasons. But the thought of seeing the look in his eyes when he found out I had lied to him for 2 years was more than I could bear. I imagined the hurt, the betrayal, the questions I couldn't answer. I imagined him walking out the door and never coming back. But if I said nothing, maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. After all, I was a ghost. Evelyn Sterling was a carefully guarded secret, hidden from the media since I was a child. There were no photos of me in the press. My father, in his obsessive need for privacy, had made sure of that. To the world, I didn't exist. Mark had no reason to connect his wife, Evie Campbell, to Richard Sterling. And my father, why would he suspect that the quiet wife of a small-town architect was the daughter who had walked out on him 7 years ago? He probably thought I was in Europe, or dead, or married to some European prince. He wouldn't be looking for me in Ohio. Cowardice one. I convinced myself it would be fine. My father would see a talented young architect from Ohio. He would be impressed by Mark's work, maybe even invest. He would never connect that architect's quiet wife to the daughter he had lost. The meeting would happen, the investment would go through, and my secret would remain safe. I would tell Mark the truth someday, when we were old and gray and none of it mattered anymore. The next day was a blur of anxiety. Mark put on his best suit, the one we'd bought on sale for a friend's wedding. I helped him tie his tie, my fingers trembling. He was so excited, so hopeful. He kissed me goodbye, his face alight with nervous energy. "Wish me luck," he said. "Good luck," I managed to whisper, my heart pounding so hard I thought he must be able to hear it. I watched him walk to his car, get in, and drive away. And then I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs giving out beneath me. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I paced our tiny apartment like a caged animal. I tried to read, but the words blurred. I tried to watch TV, but the noise was just static. I called Margaret's number, forgetting for a moment that she was gone, and hung up when I heard the voicemail of a stranger. I was a prisoner of my own making, waiting for the executioner's knock. I thought about calling my father. I still had his private number memorized, a string of digits burned into my brain from childhood. I could call him, beg him not to say anything, explain the situation. But what would I say? "Hi, Dad, it's me, the daughter you haven't spoken to in 7 years. Please don't ruin my marriage?" The thought was absurd. He would hang up on me or worse, use it as leverage. So I waited. I made coffee I didn't drink. I stared at the wall. I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. Please let him not recognize me. Please let this work. I heard his key in the lock just after 5 o'clock. I was frozen in the middle of the living room, my hands clammy, my heart in my throat. The door opened and Mark walked in. He looked stunned, dazed, like a man who had seen a ghost. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he closed the door behind him and just looked at me. The expression on his face was unreadable. It wasn't the triumphant joy I had expected. It wasn't the relief of a successful meeting. It was something else, something that made my blood run cold. "How did it go?" I asked, my voice a mere squeak. He walked towards me slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. He stopped a foot away, and I could see a storm of emotions swirling in his gaze, confusion, disbelief, and something that looked horribly like betrayal. "It went interestingly," he said, his voice quiet and controlled, which was somehow worse than if he had yelled. "Mr. Sterling is a fascinating man, very perceptive, very detailed in his questions." I swallowed hard. "Oh, yes," Mark continued, taking off his jacket and draping it over the back of a chair with exaggerated care. He didn't sit down. He was very interested in my work, my designs, my process. He asked about my inspirations, my philosophy, my long-term goals. He was thorough, I'll give him that. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "But he was even more interested in my personal life," Mark said, and his voice tightened just slightly. "He asked where I grew up. He asked about my parents. He asked how I met my wife." My blood ran cold. The room seemed to darken around the edges. "He asked about you, Evie." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and heavy. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him, my face a mask of terror. "He asked what your maiden name was," Mark said, his voice still that terrifyingly calm monotone. I told him Campbell. He smiled. It was a strange smile, not a happy one. More like he had just confirmed something he already suspected. Tears began to prick at my eyes. The world was closing in. "Then," Mark went on, taking a small step closer to me, "he asked to see a picture of you. I thought it was odd, but he's Richard Sterling. Billionaires can ask whatever they want, right? So I showed him the one on my phone, the one from our wedding, where you're laughing and your hair is blowing in the wind." He paused, and his composure finally cracked. A wave of pain washed over his face, raw and devastating. He stared at it for a long, long time, so long that I started to feel uncomfortable. Then he looked at me, and he said, "She has her mother's eyes." The air left my lungs in a whoosh. It was over. Mark's voice finally rose, the calm facade shattering completely. "Her mother's eyes, Evie. How did Richard Sterling know what your mother's eyes looked like? He said her name was Amelia. He said he was sorry to hear she had passed. He said she was a beautiful woman, inside and out. I never told him your mother's name. I never told him anything about her. How could he know that?" The tears were streaming down my face now, hot and unstoppable. "Mark, please let me explain." "Explain what?" he shouted, his voice cracking with a pain I had never heard before. "Explain that my wife, the woman I love, the woman I married, has been lying to me for 2 years. That she's not some sweet girl from a small town with an estranged father, but the daughter of one of the richest, most powerful men in the world. Explain that, Evie, explain it to me." "I was going to tell you," I sobbed, reaching for him. He flinched back, and the gesture was like a physical blow, a rejection so profound it knocked the breath from me. "I was going to tell you so many times, but I was scared. I was scared you'd think I was someone else, that you'd only want me for the money, that everything we built would be destroyed. I was scared of losing you. So you destroyed it yourself," he roared, his face red with fury and hurt. "You didn't trust me. You didn't give me the chance to prove you wrong. You just decided who I was, what I would think, without ever asking me. You took that choice away from me, Evie. You took away my right to know who I was marrying." "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words feeling utterly, pathetically inadequate. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I love you so much." He just shook his head, his anger collapsing into a deep, hollow exhaustion. He walked to the door, his hand on the knob. He stood there for a moment, his back to me, his shoulders shaking. "I need to think," he said, not looking at me. "I need to be alone. I can't even look at you right now." He walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. The soft click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my world ending. I sank to the floor, my body racked with silent sobs. I had been so afraid of losing him that I had done the one thing that guaranteed I would. The ghost of Evelyn Sterling had finally caught up with me, and she had destroyed Evie Campbell forever. The next few days were a blur of misery. Mark didn't come home. He didn't answer my calls or my texts. I called his phone so many times it died, and then I sat in the dark, staring at the wall. I called his mother, Donna, but hung up before she could answer. What would I say? "Hi, I'm the liar who broke your son's heart." I stayed in our apartment, a hollow shell, replaying every moment of our life together, searching for the point where I should have told him the truth. I found 1,000 of them. Every single day was a missed opportunity. The guilt was a poison in my veins. I also couldn't stop thinking about my father. Why now? After 7 years of silence, why this elaborate, cruel trick? Was it just to expose me? To prove his point that my real life was a fragile fantasy? It felt like a punishment, a calculated strike designed to hurt me in the most devastating way possible. I hated him. I hated him with a burning, consuming fire that left no room for anything else. He had taken the one good thing in my life and destroyed it. I barely ate. I barely slept. I called the bookstore and told my part-time helper I was sick. I was sick, just not in a way that could be cured with medicine. I spent hours looking at wedding photos, at pictures of Mark and me on vacation, at the silly notes he left on the bathroom mirror. Each one was a knife in my heart. On the 5th day, there was a knock on my door. My heart leaped, thinking it was Mark. I rushed to open it, my breath catching in my throat, ready to fall into his arms and beg for forgiveness. But it wasn't Mark. It was a man in a dark suit. He was tall, impassive, with the look of someone used to being invisible. A driver, a bodyguard, one of my father's people. I recognized the type instantly. "Miss Campbell?" he asked, though his eyes told me he knew exactly who I was. I nodded, my body tense, my heart sinking. "Mr. Sterling requests your presence," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He handed me a heavy, cream-colored envelope. "A car will pick you up at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Please be ready." He turned and left before I could even process what had happened. I stood in the doorway, holding the envelope like it might explode. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper with a familiar, authoritative script. It was an address and a time. No greeting, no signature, no explanation. Just my father's assistant's handwriting. It was an order, not an invitation. I spent another sleepless night, torn between fury and despair. Part of me wanted to rip the letter up, to defy him one last time, to show him that even now, even broken, I wouldn't crawl back. But a bigger part of me, the part that was desperate for answers, for some kind of resolution to this nightmare, knew I had to go. I had to face him. I had to look him in the eye and ask him why he had done this, why he couldn't just leave me alone. The next morning, a sleek black car was waiting outside my apartment. The same stoic man held the door open for me. I got in without a word, my hands folded in my lap, my face a mask of cold determination. The drive was long and silent, taking me to a private airfield on the outskirts of the city. A small, elegant jet was waiting on the tarmac, the Sterling Industries logo discreetly painted on the tail. I was ushered onto it without a word. The interior was all cream leather and polished wood. It smelled of money, a scent I had forgotten but my body instantly recognized. I was being transported back to a world I had tried so hard to leave behind. The flight was short, barely an hour. We landed at a private airfield in Connecticut. Another black car was waiting. We drove for another hour, the scenery becoming more and more familiar, more and more oppressive. We were heading to Greenwich, to my childhood home. The roads I had biked on as a child, the trees I had climbed, the lake where my mother used to take me swimming. It all came flooding back, a tidal wave of memory and pain. As the massive iron gates swung open, a wave of nausea washed over me. The long, winding driveway, the perfectly manicured lawns, the sprawling, intimidating mansion at the end of it, it all looked exactly the same. It was like stepping into a photograph from a past life. The car stopped at the grand entrance. The door was opened, and I was led inside. The house was just as I remembered it, cold, beautiful, and silent. My footsteps echoed on the marble floors as I was guided to my father's study. The man knocked once, opened the door, and gestured for me to enter. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me with a soft click. And there he was. Richard Sterling, my father. He was sitting behind his enormous mahogany desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked older. His hair was completely gray now, and the lines on his face were deeper. He looked thinner, too, his suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. But his eyes, those cold, analytical blue eyes, were the same. They fixed on me as I walked in, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. He didn't stand. He just looked at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he took a slow sip of his drink. "Evie," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Or should I say, Evelyn? Why?" The single word exploded out of me, a mixture of a sob and a scream. All the pain, the anger, the confusion of the past week came pouring out. "Why did you do this? Why couldn't you just leave me alone? I had a life, I was happy, and you destroyed it." He set his glass down, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Leave you alone?" he repeated, a hint of something almost like hurt in his voice. "You left me, Evelyn. You walked out of this house and erased yourself from my life. You changed your name. You cut off all contact. You made it very clear that you wanted nothing to do with me." "I didn't erase myself," I shot back, my voice trembling. "I just didn't want your life. I wanted my own. I wanted something real, something that was mine, not something bought with your money." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "And you found it, this life of yours, in a tiny apartment, with a husband who now won't speak to you, with a bookstore that barely breaks even." The cruel accuracy of his words was like a knife in my heart. "That's because of you?" I cried. "You orchestrated this whole thing. You set out to destroy what I had. You couldn't stand that I was happy without you, that I didn't need you, so you found a way to rip it all apart." For the first time, a flicker of something other than cold calculation crossed his face. He looked almost hurt, genuinely hurt. "Is that what you think of me?" he asked quietly. "That I would do that for no reason? That I am that cruel? What other reason could there be?" I demanded, my hands shaking. "You wanted to prove me wrong. You wanted me to come crawling back. You wanted to show me that I couldn't make it on my own." He was silent for a long moment, staring into his glass. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, stripped of its usual commanding tone. It was the voice of a tired old man, not a titan of industry. "I hired someone to find you about a year ago," he began. "I was curious. I wanted to know if you were okay. I had worried about you every single day for 6 years, Evelyn, every single day. I didn't know if you were alive or dead, happy or sad, safe or in danger. I couldn't take it anymore." I stared at him, stunned into silence. "They gave me a report," he continued. "They told me you were happy, that you worked in a bookstore, that you had friends who loved you, that you had a boyfriend, a young architect named Mark. They told me you laughed a lot, that you volunteered at a local shelter, that you were kind to strangers." He looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw a profound sadness in his eyes, a depth of emotion I had never seen in him before. "I saw a picture of you, Evie. You were laughing, you were holding a book. You looked free. You looked happy in a way I had never seen you look in this house. In all the years you lived here, I never once saw you laugh like that." I was stunned into silence. This wasn't the narrative I had expected. This wasn't the cold, calculating villain I had built in my mind. "I decided not to interfere," he continued. "I told myself my daughter was happy, and that was enough. It was hard, harder than you can imagine, but I stayed away. I watched from afar. I saw your engagement announcement in a small local paper. I saw the picture of you in your simple white dress. You were beaming. You looked just like your mother on our wedding day." A tear slipped down his cheek, and I felt my own heart crack a little. I had never, in my entire life, seen my father cry. Not at my mother's funeral, not when I left, never. And now, here he was, tears streaming down his face, and I didn't know what to do. "Then," he said, his voice hardening slightly, wiping the tear away with the back of his hand, "my people came to me with some other information. About your husband's firm. They were struggling. They were about to go under. They had lost their biggest client and were weeks away from bankruptcy. And my daughter, my proud, stubborn, wonderful daughter, was going to struggle right along with them." He stood up from his desk and walked over to the window, his back to me. "I had a choice," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "I could let it happen. I could let you learn your lesson about the real world. I could watch you lose everything and say, 'I told you so.' Or I could find a way to help you without you ever knowing it was from me. I could be the father I never was, quietly, from the shadows." He turned to face me. "The Miles Corporation project was a shell. I bought the company that owns it. I created a scenario where the only way for your husband to get the lifeline he needed was to come to me. I did it to help you, Evie. I did it because you are my daughter, and I love you, and I couldn't stand by and watch you struggle when I have the power to make it all go away. I couldn't lose you again. His words washed over me, a tidal wave of new information, a complete restructuring of everything I thought I knew. He hadn't been trying to expose me. He hadn't been trying to punish me. He had been trying to secretly help us, to be the father he never knew how to be, in the only way he understood. His plan, however clumsy and misguided, had been born from a father's love, not a tyrant's desire for control. But I never meant for it to happen like this, he said, his voice filled with regret, his shoulders slumping. I didn't think about the meeting. I didn't think he would show me your picture. I thought I could just sign some papers, make some calls, and disappear back into the shadows. When he pulled out his phone and I saw your face, so happy, so grown up, looking so much like your mother, I lost my composure for a moment. I said something I shouldn't have. It was a mistake. A stupid old man's mistake. And I am so sorry, Evie. I am so sorry for the pain I have caused you. I would give anything to take it back. I stood there, frozen, tears streaming down my face. All my anger, all my carefully constructed defenses, all my years of resentment were crumbling. He wasn't the villain I had painted him to be. He was just a flawed, lonely old man who had made a terrible, desperate mistake in a misguided attempt to help his daughter. He was just a father who didn't know how to love, trying to learn. You should have just let us fail, I whispered, my voice choked. You should have just stayed away, it would have been better than this. I know, he said, his own voice thick with emotion. I know that now, but I couldn't. I couldn't watch you struggle and do nothing. It's the only way I know how to love, Evelyn, with money, with power. It's all I have. It's all I've ever had. Your mother was the only one who ever saw past it, and when she died, I lost the only person who could teach me how to be different. He walked towards me, slowly, hesitantly, as if approaching a wild animal. He stopped a foot away from me, the same distance Mark had stood just a week ago. He looked so old, so tired, so full of regret. His eyes were red, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. Can you ever forgive me? He asked, his voice a broken whisper. I looked at my father, the man I had run from, the man I had resented for so long. And for the first time, I didn't see the cold titan of industry. I saw a lonely man, trapped in his own gilded cage, who had just tried in the only way he knew how to reach out to his daughter. My anger didn't vanish, but it made room for something else. Pity, understanding, and a tiny, fragile flicker of something I hadn't felt for him in a very long time. Love. I didn't answer his question. I couldn't. The emotions were too raw, too new, too complicated. But I took a step forward, and I let him put his arms around me for the first time in 7 years. It was an awkward, stiff embrace, two people who had forgotten how to be father and daughter. He smelled the same, like expensive cologne and old books. He felt smaller than I remembered, frailer. But it was a start. He pulled back after a long moment, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief he produced from his pocket. I have a plane waiting, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. It will take you back to Ohio whenever you're ready, and Evie, the offer for your husband's firm still stands. No strings attached. It's an investment based on the merit of his work, which is considerable. I've seen his designs. He's talented, genuinely talented. He never has to know about any of this. It can be just a business deal if that's what you want. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to say I love you, but those words were even harder. So I just nodded, and he seemed to understand. The drive back to the airfield was a blur. The flight was a chance to process the seismic shift in my understanding of everything. My father wasn't a monster. He was just my father. A broken, complicated man who had done a broken, complicated thing, and I had a marriage to try and save. When I finally got back to our apartment, the lights were off. My heart sank. I opened the door, my body heavy with exhaustion, my mind still reeling from the day's revelations. And there, sitting on the sofa in the dark, was Mark. He looked up as I came in. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale and unshaven. He looked as terrible as I felt, maybe worse. There was an empty coffee mug on the table beside him, and an ashtray with several cigarette butts, even though he had quit smoking 2 years ago. I've been waiting for you, he said, his voice rough and tired. I stood by the door, unsure of what to do, what to say. Mark, I'm so… Don't, he said, holding up a hand. Please, no more apologies for a minute. Just let me talk. I've been sitting here for hours thinking I need to say this. I nodded, leaning against the doorframe, my heart pounding. He took a deep, shaky breath. I've spent the last week in hell, he began. I was so angry, so hurt. I felt like I didn't know you at all, like our whole marriage was a lie, like every moment we shared was built on a foundation of sand. I went through every conversation, every memory, looking for the lie. I questioned everything. He paused, running a hand through his disheveled hair. But the thing is, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't true. The lies were about your past, about where you came from. But the woman I fell in love with, the woman who makes me coffee in the morning just the way I like it, who reads to me at night when I can't sleep, who holds my hand when I'm scared about work, that woman is real. That woman isn't a lie. That woman is you, Evie. He stood up and walked towards me, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the pain etched into every line of his face. I was angry because you didn't trust me, he continued, his voice softening. And that hurt more than the secret itself. It made me feel like I wasn't good enough, like you thought I would turn on you the moment I found out you had money. And that hurt, Evie, it really hurt. Tears were pouring down my face again, but this time they were tears of relief, of hope, of a love so overwhelming it threatened to drown me. But I've been trying to put myself in your shoes, he said. I've been trying to imagine what it must have been like for you, growing up in that world, surrounded by people who only wanted you for your name. I've been trying to imagine what it felt like to lose your mother, to feel so alone in that big house, to have a father who didn't know how to love you. I can see why you ran. I can see why you were scared. I can see why you built this new life, this new you. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away my tears. I wish you had told me, he said softly, his eyes searching mine. God, I wish you had, but I understand why you didn't. And I'm not going to let your fear or your father's mistake or my hurt feelings destroy what we have. I love you, Evie. I love Evie Campbell and I love Evelyn Sterling because they're the same person. They're you. I'm so sorry, Mark, I sobbed, the words tumbling out in a rush. I'm so sorry I didn't trust you. I'm so sorry I lied. I was just so scared. I love you so much. I can't lose you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I know, he whispered, kissing my forehead, then my cheeks, then my lips. I know, I love you too. We're going to get through this. Together, we're going to talk and we're going to cry and we're going to be angry and then we're going to heal, together. He held me for a long, long time, right there in the doorway. And in his arms, the shattered pieces of my world began to slowly, painstakingly, fit back together. The cracks would always be there, a reminder of what we had survived, but they would also be proof of our strength. The next few months were a process of rebuilding. Mark and I talked for hours, sometimes late into the night, about my past, my fears, my mother, my father. He was patient and understanding, asking questions, listening without judgment. He shared his own fears, his own insecurities, his own pain at feeling excluded from such a huge part of my life. We cried together, we yelled at each other, we made up. We learned to communicate in a way we never had before. He met with my father, a tense but ultimately productive meeting. My father flew to Ohio, and they had lunch at a small diner near our apartment. I waited at home, my stomach in knots, for 2 hours. When Mark came back, he had a strange look on his face. He's not what I expected, Mark said slowly. He's lonely. He talked about your mother for an hour. He showed me pictures of you as a little girl. He asked me about my work, really listened. He's not a monster, Evie. He's just a sad old man who doesn't know how to connect. The investment went through, based purely on Mark's talent and the merit of his designs. My father never once mentioned our relationship in any business context. He treated Mark as a professional, nothing more. Mark's firm flourished. They hired 2 new architects, took on bigger projects, started getting noticed in the industry. Mark came home one night, his face lit up with joy, and told me they had won an award for one of their designs. I had never been prouder of him. My relationship with my father is still a work in progress. It's awkward and fragile, like learning to walk after a broken leg. We're learning how to be in each other's lives. He's trying to show love in ways that don't involve a checkbook, and I'm trying to let him. He calls me every Sunday just to talk. He asks about the bookstore, about Mark, about my life. He started reading, really reading, and we have long conversations about books. He told me my mother would be proud of me, and I cried for an hour. He flew in for our 1-year wedding anniversary, a small, quiet dinner at our apartment. He brought a bottle of expensive wine, which we drank, but he also brought something else. A photo of my mother that I had never seen before. It was her at my age, sitting in a field of wildflowers, laughing at something off camera. She looked so happy, so free. It was the best gift he could have given me. My husband did not know my father was a billionaire. And for a while, that secret nearly cost me everything. It nearly destroyed the life I had built, the love I had found, the future I had dreamed of. But in the end, the truth, as painful as it was, didn't break us. It forced us to rebuild, stronger and more honest than before. It forced me to confront my past, to forgive my father, to forgive myself. I am Evie Campbell. I am also Evelyn Sterling. And for the first time in my life, I am learning that I can be both. The ghost is gone. I am finally, completely, and unapologetically me. And in the eyes of the man I love, I am exactly who I am supposed to be.